So last week we talked about how fabric is the first thing we talked about that can affect your accuracy. That means the quality of the fabric. If we pre-treat it with starch, at least make sure you press it really nicely, because that's really going to affect your accuracy as you start sewing it. So there's so many things other than just our seam allowance. It's not just about our sewing. It's about all the prep work. So with my tip of the day today, we're diving into the next part, which is cutting out your pieces. So in this tip of the day, we're diving into part 2 of what comes into play when it comes to our piecing accuracy. In part 1, we talked about our fabrics, and in this part, we're talking about cutting our fabrics. Once our fabrics are to our standards and have been pressed or treated, of course, next step in the integral part of making a quilt is cutting our fabrics, and this one really makes a difference in as far as our accuracy. So lots of things that come into play here, but first we're starting with our rulers. But other than tools, there's also our techniques and our habits that come into play here, and I'm going to mention those. Starting with the rulers, of course, I'm not going to spend too much time. My preference is, of course, our Stripology rulers. There are many advantages to the Stripology rulers as far as accuracy comes. But you can, of course, use whatever rulers work for you. What I do recommend is checking the accuracy of the measurements. That is always helpful. Now, I prefer Creative Grids rulers in general because they have the built-in grip on the backside, which means the ruler will not slide on your fabric. My second reason for preferring those rulers is their accuracy. They guarantee their accuracy down to a 0.0002 of a second of an inch. So it is really, you're really safe there as far as accuracy. Also, I like the clear rulers and only having white and black lines. That is really helpful. You can see it on most fabrics, either the black lines or the white lines, and you don't have a color to the ruler that's gonna mess with your eyes, which of course gets enhanced if you have any kind of eye problems. So that are my main reasonings. Of course, for the Stripology rulers, the great thing is you're not so dependent on user errors as far as measuring and cutting, because you are just cutting through the slits. Every cut is going to be the same spacing. Of course, with regular rulers, we are dependent on being consistent with where we line up our rulers. But first off, as far as rulers come, choose the ones that you can guarantee their accuracy, something that's easy for you to see all the lines, no matter what type of fabric you're working with. Now, as we talk about the accuracy of our rulers, we need to also talk about the surface that we're going to cut on. So our cutting mats, they make a big difference as far as our accuracy is concerned. If they are too worn out, they are going to affect how that rotary cutter runs alongside it. You might get nicks and gaps in your cutting mat, and that's really going to affect the way your fabric pieces are cut. So make sure you swap out your mat once it gets too worn out. Now, to maintain your mats, I prefer a mat that is self-healing, and you need to clean out the fabric fibers on a regular basis. Give it a nice warm water bath about once a month or every other month. And another thing I look at, so just like I talked about the lines on the rulers and the color of your mat and your lines on your mat are also going to affect your accuracy. If you're using rulers that have white and black lines, make sure you don't have a mat that either is black or white and has white or black lines, because that's going to really affect and mess up your eyes as you're cutting, and that could affect your cutting accuracy. And the second thing is make sure that your mat is not slippery. If you're in the market for a mat check that your fabric is not slipping and sliding on it. It's nice where they have a little bit of grip once your fabric is down, that is not moving too much on your cutting mat. So next up are, of course, our cutting tools, our cutters. And this isn't so much a personal preference that I'm not even going to show you all the different options. But here are some of the things that are important when choosing a cutter for you. Number one, you want to make sure that it sits well in your hand, whether you can place your finger on top or if it's ergonomic. Some have a handle that is like this. So make sure that you find a cutter that you can consistently keep steady at a 90-degree angle with your cutting mat. So the cutter needs to be perfectly perpendicular with your cutting mat. So find a cutter that you can consistently hold at this angle, and you're not going to be unstable going either way or have a hard time keeping it straight up. The second thing to look at is making sure when you pull that blade guard back is that your blade is completely stable in the cutter. So whether you're getting a new cutter or checking your own, make sure it's stable in there. It's not wobbling back and forth, because if it wobbles, that's what's going to happen as you cut, and you're going to get inconsistent cuts. And the third thing, you want to make sure as when you cut on that cutting mat that the blade rotates easily. If it does not rotate easily, your screw or it's too tight in the cutter. You need to have the blade rotate so that it can cut through the fabric more easily. So once you have a cutter that works for you, can hold it stable, and you like it, another thing that is very important is, of course, the blade, and to change those on a regular basis. Now, there is no time to say after this much time change your blade. It's a personal preference, and it's based on how much you cut. My measurement is always, once I have to start putting real pressure on my cutter when cutting through 4 layers of fabric, that means that blade is getting dull and it's time for a new one. And I'm just like everybody else. I wait way too long to switch my blade, and once we do, we wonder why we didn't do that earlier. So make sure you freshen up that blade. Don't wait too long, because if you do have a dull blade, it affects the accuracy of the cuts. It can mess up your cutting mat and wear that out faster. It can even mess up your rulers if you're jumping all over the place with a dull blade. So very important to switch your blade when it needs to. The second thing is with the cutters is the size. So normally when you're doing something very precise, very tiny pieces, I would prefer a smaller cutter just to have more control. The bigger cutter, it's also, of course, personal to you. Maybe you have better control with a bigger cutter, but for me, the golden rule is the smaller the pieces, the smaller cutter I like. So I like to switch to my 45 when I need to have some more accuracy cutting smaller pieces. So I wanted to mention too, if you are switching your blade, be careful not to put 2 blades in. That is something that happens all the time and really can mess up your cuts. Now let's talk about the last thing as far as cutting your fabrics, and that are our habits, our bad habits. Those habits can really affect our accuracy in cutting, and some of those, the first thing I want to talk about, if you're using regular rulers where you have to line up a line on your fabric, to be consistent. Consistency is key with a lot of these things. So if your line is up against the edge of the fabric, maybe it's on top of it, choose one. Sometimes the manufacturer of the rulers will recommend, but the golden rule is to not see a gap between the line and the fabric, and possibly be a little bit on top of it, right on that edge to make your cuts. The second thing I wanted to mention is cutting away from you and not towards you. So cutting away from you is always going to give you more accuracy. It's a more natural movement than cutting towards you. And I always recommend just cutting one way and not the other. I've sometimes seen where you go back and forth, whether that's with the Stripology Ruler or these. Going back and forth is not a good idea. Even if you feel like you didn't get the full cut, go back into the slit and go the same direction. Because if you're pulling against the fibers that you just cut, you're going to get a little bit of a ragged edge on your fabric. And the last thing, but a big one, is when we're cutting up against regular rulers like this, beveling your blade is a big culprit in inaccurate cuts. So that means, I talked about this earlier, we want to be able to have our cutter at a perfect 90-degree angle with a cutting mat, but beveling means that your cutter either angles out this way or it angles this way. So it's all based on how you hold it, how you're able to push through that cut. And I can show you the difference. If I bevel it this way, I make a cut, and then I'll make another one beveling it the other way. You get two very different sized cuts. So they are not the same size, because there can be up to an 1/8 of an inch difference by just beveling. And of course, that's one of the most beautiful things about the Stripology rulers. There is no way to bevel, because the slits, you have to have your rotary cutter perpendicular to the cutting mat, so you cannot bevel, which is one of the things that contributes to the great accuracy of those rulers.